My name is Brendan Scott, and I'm Historian in Residence for Cavan County Council. And as part of the Decade of Centenaries programme, I've been recording a number of these short webisodes in which I discuss the various events, people and themes which arise in Cavan during the 1910s and early 1920s. And for the final entry in this series, I'm going home to my native town of Belturbet to discuss the events which took place there during the revolutionary years of the early 20th century. Now, although relations had been friendly enough between the British authorities and the townspeople, although that waxed and waned, as we'll see shortly, things became particularly tense during the War of Independence, with one particular long-running controversy centred around the town hall. The town hall, which was based on the diamond, that's the diamond there. You're actually seeing the diamond from the perspective of the town hall there. That was the centre of the town's administration, and as such was a visible sign, along with the barracks, the military barracks, was a visible sign of British authority in Belturbet, and always had been really from the 17th century onwards. And in October 1919, the West Cavan volunteers of the IRA entered the town hall and daubed tar across the royal coat of arms, which were displayed in the council chamber, where the town council met and where a petty session was about to be held. And as well as destroying the coat of arms, the volunteers then painted a skull inscribed with the letters RIP on it. And to go along with the skull, there was also painted a tricolour with the letters IR, standing for Irish Republic, beside it. So this was a very forceful reminder to those who met in the chamber, and also those who were dispensing justice in the chamber, just about how strong, I suppose, anti-British forces were in West Cavan during the War of Independence. Now, the councillors themselves mostly would have been quite sympathetic to the aims of the volunteers, and they made no attempt to take down a tricolour, which was hoisted onto the clock tower, which was at the front of the town hall. And at the council meeting the following month, that flag was still in situ. And it's curious that it wasn't taken down, and possibly points to a lack of confidence within among the RIC or the army to get it taken down. A royal notice was served on the council ordering that they remove the flag, but the council refused, and they answered that, and this is a quote, "They did not put the flag there, and others could take it down if they wished, but the council would not do their work for them." So the British authorities took the council at their word and took control of the town hall, chaining the door shut and removing the offending tricolour. Now, that story continued to have legs, as in December 1919, a number of RIC raids were carried out in the town, and as a result of which, a guy called Owen Hand, who was a shop assistant, was arrested. Now, this arrest went down very, very badly, and a large crowd soon congregated outside the RIC barracks in the town where he was held. And there was a lot of chanting and singing of what they call Sinn Féin choruses and Republican songs and so on. And the crowd was getting bigger and bigger and would not disperse. So at around midnight, the RIC actually baton charged the crowd, resulting in the injury of a number of people who were in the crowd. This obviously did not help tensions in the town, which were seriously exacerbated by this, as you can imagine. He was later tried. Owen Hand was later tried in Cavan Court, and he was charged with being found in possession of Republican literature and different things, and with a note on how to tie a flag to the town hall. So they were pinning basically the tying of the tricolour on Owen Hand. Now, Hand refused to recognise the legitimacy of the court, but nevertheless he was sentenced to 2 months in prison, and the town hall itself remained closed for a couple of months as well as a result of this controversy. Now, that was 1919, but 1920 was really a busy year in Belturbet, packed full of incident. And just to give a taste of some of this, a letter was read at the Belturbet Town Council meeting held on the 17th of May in 1920. A letter came from a solicitor in Cavan representing the Crown to notify Belturbet Town Council that he would be making an application at the next quarterly sessions in Cavan for compensation of £200 for the burning of Belturbet barracks sometime previously. Now, no comment was made by the council in response to this letter was recorded in the minutes. The minutes just note that the letter be marked red, but I can guarantee you that there was plenty of things said that were unrecorded and not noted in the minutes that particular day. They just didn't write it down. As I said, the relationship between the town and the barracks waxed and waned over the years. And for example, in 1882, there was a report of some disturbances and fights between soldiers stationed in the barracks and locals in the town. The West Cavan nationalist MP, Joe Bigger, complained in Parliament of that the soldiers had attacked locals for no reason, and the response given was, well, that these soldiers had been targeted by what they called the roughs of that town. So, you know, that kind of rowdy lads had attacked these soldiers, and the soldiers were merely standing up for themselves. That caused quite a bit of controversy, and it's something I think I'll be going back and looking at in more detail at a later time. But sometimes relationships were good, and in 1904, for example, the town soccer team were quite happy to play a selection from the military barracks. So, you know, sometimes it was friendly, sometimes not so friendly. The barracks lay unoccupied for various periods during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but by the late 1910s, part of it had been leased out to the RIC for use as a barracks there. Now, on the 22nd of July 1920, a young Belturbet man called Michael McGrath was brought up in court for having taken part in an attack on an RIC patrol in Belturbet. And at 8:30 on the morning, that morning of 22nd of July, a small RIC patrol were out around the town. And shortly, having walked between the two bridges, Kilcunny Bridge and the railway bridge, they were coming back towards Kilcunny when shots were fired at them from beneath an arch of the bridge. An RIC man called Sergeant Conroy was shot in the left hand, and Michael McGrath, who was one of the assailants, was shot in the foot. And when McGrath was arrested, they found a revolver on him with one round used. And McGrath said when he was questioned about this that he didn't mean to shoot Conroy. He had aimed high to avoid shooting him because he actually knew Conroy and had dealings with him in the past and got along well with him and had no problem with Conroy, and said, you know, that he didn't want to shoot him at all. Now, we'll get into that in a bit more detail in a moment. But as well as the revolver, McGrath also had in his possession 60 10-shilling notes, one £1 note, £2 and 15 shillings in stamps, and 2 postal orders worth 2 and 6 each, and 15 registered letters. Michael stated that he had been forced, masked men had come to his house and forced him to take part in a raid on a mail car. And then following the raid, whatever they got from the raid would be kept in McGrath's house until these masked men came back. McGrath said he didn't know who the men were. They never took their masks off, and he didn't know who they were. They also gave him a gun at this time as well. So they were going back to McGrath's house when the RIC patrol came upon them, at which point the masked men who McGrath was with began to fire at the RIC patrol. And McGrath said, you know, that they said, if you don't start firing, we will shoot you. So he had no choice but to fire, and only one shot was fired anyway. And he said he was greatly saddened and very apologetic about shooting Conroy, because he didn't want to do that. So these men, once McGrath had been shot in the foot, they absconded, leaving McGrath literally to take the blame for the whole lot. So there was stuff like that going on at the time, and again, something like that would have been the talk of the town for, you know, weeks afterwards, and would have caused tension in the town as well. And just to give you some ideas of these tensions, following that happened in July 1920, and in August 1920 there was an attack on the RIC barracks in Belturbet as well, and a local magistrate was injured in that attack as well. So these are the sort of things that are happening quite regularly in Belturbet at this time. And these sort of things were happening all over the country. Belturbet's not unusual in that, but these were the sort of things that were happening nevertheless. Now, more controversy again erupted around the town hall in 1920. In late December that year, the following words were written in paint on the town hall: "Vote for Galligan and an Irish Republic and freedom." And that was a reference to Peter Paul Galligan, who was running in an election which was going to be held in 1921. And Galligan was actually in prison at the time, but he still managed to get elected anyway. Now, that graffiti did not go down well. And on the 4th of January 1921, 2 carloads of armed men raided some premises in Belturbet, and a house belonging to a guy called William Byrne was set alight as well. And these men, they're never officially recognized, but these men made it clear that if the slogan on the town hall was not removed, then the town would suffer. And a game of tit for tat really then began, as a few weeks later, in late January 1921, the pro-Galligan slogan was replaced with a skull and crossbones, and a Union Jack was attached then to the town hall, where the tricolour had been flying in 1919. So, again, a very, very visible reminder, a daily visible reminder of the tensions which were brewing in the town at that time. And tensions continued to be very high in the town following all of this activity, and it increased again with the death of Captain Sean McIntyre on the 4th of June 1921. McIntyre, who was 21 years old at the time of his death and from Lagan, just outside Belturbet, was killed when setting a fire to destroy Tompkin Road House, which the IRA had believed might become an auxiliary base. Falling masonry caused by the explosion killed McIntyre instantly, and he was covered in debris. And because of this, it took several weeks to recover McIntyre's body, when it was spirited out to Drumlane Cemetery for safe burial, and where he's buried out in Drumlane. Sean, at the time of his death, had been living on the family farm with his widowed sister-in-law and nephew. The sister-in-law's name was Mary and the nephew was Hugh. He had a brother, Sean had a brother who died in 1919, and the son, Hugh, was only 4 or 5 years old when Sean died. And by 1930, Mary and Hugh, the mother and son, were experiencing serious financial difficulties and had to sell the farm. They'd no one to farm it, and they weren't able to farm it themselves. So they sold up the farm, and they were living in Bridge Street, Belturbet, by 1934, and they were renting out a room to a lodger. It wasn't their house. They were renting the house and then subletting a room out to a lodger. This is the only kind of income they had. And they made unsuccessful attempts to secure dependence allowances from the state at that point, but never got them. Sean's sister Kathleen was also refused an allowance. But in 1950, a very elaborate headstone was erected over his grave out in Drumlane, and that's his grave there, just right beside the Abbey in Drumlane. Now, although the truce began on the 11th of July 1921, the West Cavan Brigade of the IRA were still keeping a close eye on events in Belturbet. And a report made by the Belturbet branch of the West Cavan Brigade from December 1921 stated that, and this is a quote, "At 3:30, a lorry of black and tans, I think they are swad ones, came into town and went about the town in and out of the public houses for 3 hours." So there's no mention of violence or shots fired or anything like that, but the tans were very much making their presence felt in and about the town, and people who were watching them thought that they recognized them from Swanland Bar. That same report also mentioned that, again, this is a quote, there are several girls keeping company with the black and tans, and those girls are named as well. So they were keeping a very close eye on anyone who's having anything to do with the black and tans in and around Belturbet. But generally, for the remainder of 1921, things generally remained quiet. There was one death, an accidental death of a Corporal William Jacobs, and he was a British soldier who was stationed in the barracks in Belturbet, and he was shot accidentally by a young private who was handling a revolver, and the revolver discharged, and Jacobs was shot. And the young private who accidentally shot him was apparently almost delirious with grief at what he had done. And Corporal Jacobs is buried in the Church of Ireland graveyard in Belturbet. But I think the most serious and tragic incident to occur in the area around this time was in June 1922, when on the 18th of that month, Margaret Livingstone, a girl who was 13, coming on 14, was shot dead by a group of men who, under cover of darkness, had attacked the home in which she lived in Ardloher. Margaret, who is known as Madge, was looking out her upstairs bedroom window at the commotion downstairs with these men who had come to the house when a shot accidentally caught her in the head and killed her instantly. Her father, James, had been postmaster in Belturbet and had refused to cooperate with raiders and different things like that around this time. And this, along with the fact that he was a Protestant, marked him out for reprisal. Now, I don't think that anybody went to the Livingstone house in Ardloher that night with the intention of killing anybody, let alone a 13 or 14-year-old girl. But nevertheless, that was the dreadful, dreadful outcome of that evening. No one was ever identified. Livingstone never identified anyone who was there, and no one was ever arrested or charged for Margaret's death. Now, following the creation of the Free State in late 1922, the Free State Army temporarily occupied the barracks in Belturbet. That's the barracks there, on the site where Morrissey Park is now. Some of the Free State soldiers there also decided to make their mark on the town in a way which would have been very worrying for any unionists still in Cavan, because the unionists in Cavan were now on what they saw as being the wrong side of the border, separated from the kingdom, from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And they would have, I think, seen what happened in Belturbet. They would have watched that with great worry. On the 12th of July 1924, 7 Free State soldiers attacked the Orange Hall, which was literally a stone's throw from the barracks. It's just at the top of the hill and the barracks is at the bottom of the hill. And they did quite a lot of damage to the building, about £75 worth of damage to the building, which was a sizable amount at that time. 6 of these soldiers, of the 7 soldiers, were from the southern part of Ireland, by which I mean, not border counties, from further down, Limerick, Clare, that sort of area. And they had and their defense was they had never seen orange celebrations before, and they were disgusted by them. So on the night of the 12th into the 13th of July, these soldiers who was stated in court were very drunk, did quite a bit of damage, as I say, to the hall and its fittings. That's the hall there. That's the Orange Hall there, just in between there, the doctors and the old bakery. And the case went to court, and it was noted that dirt was thrown at orange banners and flags, offensive expressions were used, and the provocation was extreme. So you can imagine, as I say, any unionists who were worried about what way things were going to go when your own army was attacking local buildings that they didn't like. That must have been a great cause of concern for Protestants and Unionists in and around Cavan and Belturbet in particular. The solicitor representing the Orange Order, a guy called William Reid, who represented a lot of Unionist and Protestant interests in Cavan, he stated in court they didn't want to make a thing of it. They didn't want to make trouble. And he stated that there was good feeling in the town, in Belturbet, between Catholics and Protestants, and that the Orange Order were keen to retain that good feeling and to promote that good feeling. And the judge presiding noted, and this is a quote from the judge, that they were all citizens of the Free State, and it didn't matter whether they went to Orange, Masonic, or AOH halls, or any of these. They were all free to live their own lives, and it would be appalling if anything like this could be tolerated. That was what the judge said. One of the men had the charges dropped, but it was decided that a custodial sentence for the other 6 soldiers could be avoided if the sum of £75 plus costs was paid, and the Orange Order was very happy to go along with that. So I suppose to conclude, Belturbet, which was a military town on the border of what was to be Northern Ireland and the Free State, saw plenty of action and controversy over a very short number of years during Ireland's revolutionary and civil war period, but thankfully didn't really experience such a level of violence again until the awful deaths of 2 teenagers in the dreadful bomb in 1972. But that's a story for another day. And again, just if anyone is interested in where you can learn more about these incidents, there's a number of places you can look. There's a great website, a newspaper archive called irishnewsarchive.com, where you can find loads of different things, not only in the Anglo-Celt, but in loads of different papers as well. There's information about what's going on in Belturbet, and but always the prime source from newspapers is the Anglo-Celt, which is such a fantastic resource, so useful. There's also the great book which came out last year by Ewan O'Halpin and Dáithí Ó The Dead of the Irish Revolution. There's material in there about Sean McIntyre and the soldier Jacobs who was shot dead and so on. Johann Farley's book, which came out a few years ago, Royalists, Rebels and Revolutionists, gives a great context to everything that's going on in Cavan at this time, and is very, very useful. Michael Finnegan wrote a pamphlet up for Cavan County Museum, called United Under the Flag, The War of Independence 1919 to 21, which again gives great context and local detail as well. And the Cavan History podcast, I'm plugging my own podcast here, the episode with the Irish Grants Committee that I did with Dan Purcell, that gives quite a bit of information about Margaret Livingstone's death as well. So they're all useful sources to take a look at. And so I suppose just to sum up, this is the final webisode of this series, but there will be longer lectures by other historians going online shortly as well. So keep an eye out for those too. There will also be an online exhibition and a book of essays coming, I hope, in October. So again, keep your eyes peeled for those. My thanks as always to Cavan County Council for their support, in particular the library service, and in particular Emma Clancy, the county librarian, Sinead McCardle of the Cootehill branch, who does such great work in putting together these webisodes and the podcasts as well. She really finishes them off really well, and I'm very, very appreciative of that work. And especially as well Jonathan Smith, who is such a help to me at all times. He couldn't do enough for you, and I really appreciate that. And one of the things as well that which is very good to look at as well, I just remembered there in relation to recommended reading, are the Belturbet town minutes, which are up in the library in Cavan and give loads of detail about goings on in the town throughout this whole period and before and after as well, and are well worth having a look at if you're interested in the history of the town. As I say, this is the last one and of these webisodes, and I just want to thank everybody who tuned in to these 7 webisodes, and for the podcast as well. And there'll be a few more podcasts coming down the line as well, so keep an eye or an ear out for those too. I've really been overwhelmed by the support and interest that these webisodes and podcasts have engendered, and I'm really been touched by the various messages of support and positive comments that I've received since they began. All of these webisodes and podcasts and so on will remain available on Cavan County Council's Decade of Centenaries webpage, and so people can go back to them, or if you've missed any of them, check them out for the first time. Thank you so much everyone for listening. I still have a lot more work to do, so hopefully I'll see you again in the future. Thank you.